Meanwhile, EU commissioners have been discussing a package of possible measures aimed at pressuring Israel to end the war in Gaza. The measures were proposed in European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union speech last week. Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has written to von der Leyen, urging her to abandon the idea, saying that any such sanctions would empower Hamas and jeopardize efforts to end the war. This from the EU's chief diplomat, Kaja Kallas.
The aim is not to punish Israel. The aim is to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. All member states agree that the situation in Gaza is untenable. The war needs to end. The suffering must stop and all hostages must be released. We must use all the tools we have towards this outcome. We must also not lose sight of the dangerous developments in the West Bank that reduce the viability of a two-state solution.
Well, as we heard there then, spurred on by that ground invasion of Gaza City and, of course, the recent UN report labelling Israel's conduct in the war as genocide, the EU commissioners have been discussing a number of mostly political sanctions, such as asset freezes and travel bans on far-right ministers, as well as violent Israeli settlers. But we want to talk more widely about the subject of possible trade sanctions on Israel and what any impact of those trade sanctions might be. And to do this, I'm joined today on the line from London now by Michael Ben-Gad. Mr. Ben-Gad, you are Professor of Economics at City St George's University of London, and you have worked in the past, I think, in the research department at the Bank of Israel. Very good to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. I want to start, first of all, there is a bit of confusion. First of all, we've been hearing EU commissioners talking about cutting proposed bilateral support. I mean, what exactly do they mean by that? Bilateral support doesn't sound like trade. What is that? Perhaps you could clear that up for us, first of all.
Well, there are all sorts of things like the Horizon program, which is related to research and development. I think that's probably what they're hinting at. What the Commission, what Ms. Kallas was speaking about today was getting rid of or limiting Israel's preferential trade status vis-a-vis the EU, which would mean not that there would be necessarily sanctions, but that there's right now a very high degree of free trade in both directions between the EU and Israel that would impact from the Israeli side, perhaps about 15 billion euros worth of exports. In other words, it would be basically the physical goods that go to Europe. A very big part of the Israel's exports are in the form of services, including a lot of software. And generally, that I wouldn't expect that would be greatly impacted by this.
There does appear to be a general reluctance within the EU to go for actual meaningful trade sanctions. And nevertheless, we hear that Israel, 32% of its exports go to the European Union. You're saying there mainly in software and services.
Why Not mainly, but it's a substantial.
Give us an idea of some of the other sectors where Israel exports to the European Union, what Israel might lose if sanctions were imposed, and how would that impact the European Union?
Okay, so now we're talking about something very different, which is not what is being discussed at the moment. So hypothetically, if we actually had sanctions, and let's take the most extreme example, where there were export sanctions and also import sanctions and export sanctions. So Israel would no longer be able to export and generate foreign currency. It would also not be able to import from the EU. And imports from the EU, even though Israel runs generally a current account surplus, it actually runs a deficit vis-a-vis the EU. Then we're talking about a fairly large hit to the Israeli standard of living. Because generally Israel imports a lot of consumer goods from European Union. They would be difficult to replace in the immediate term. That would also depend on whether we could find substitutes in terms of exports. Israel does not produce a lot of sort of consumer goods, manufactured consumer goods that you can easily see on shelves. A lot of it is what we would call capital goods. So it's machinery that is used to produce other things. And of course, there's the whole question of defense exports. And there, I think you see a great deal of reluctance on the part of some members of the EU to cut those ties, especially given the situation to the east vis-a-vis the threat from Russia. The idea of cutting themselves off from, let's say, anti-missile technology is probably not something that most of the eastern parts of the EU would be keen on doing.
Netanyahu made that speech on Monday where he talked about Israel
Yes.
becoming like Sparta, the Greek people, the Greek nation, famously self-sufficient, strong militarily. He said Israel will have to reduce its dependence on outside countries, outside industries. Is that possible for Israel? Can they increase production to do that?
No. So, I mean, a little bit of context to this speech. So he gave a speech on Monday suggesting the analogy to Sparta was a very strange one. If anybody knows a little about the history of Sparta and what it was like, this was a society founded on murder and cruelty. I mean, it was almost the exact opposite of what we normally think of as being sort of Judeo-Christian values. And he's somebody who likes to remind everybody that he's the son of a history professor. So this was a very odd thing to choose. It created a good deal of panic within the business community. It caused the stock market to drop several percent. And so last night, he held a press conference where he basically walked a lot of that back. And he said that what he was only really referring to was defense industry, that we would have to become more self-sufficient when it came to the production of ammunition, for example. Even then, it's not entirely realistic. I mean, when we think about sort of high-tech weaponry that Israel, let's say, produces, I mean, the components are often, I mean, there are thousands of components and they come from all over the world. I'm right now in London, and even Britain could not necessarily produce high-tech weaponry just relying on its own resources.
And you talked there about the markets after his initial speech on Sparta, about the markets reacting very badly to it. Israel, this war will be coming up to its second year shortly. It is a very resilient country, the economy. What is the economy looking like? And are investors still investing in Israel?
There was an immediate hit, not necessarily because of the war, but when the government took over, it won the election in November of 2022, and they announced new judicial reform in January of 2023. And already you saw a lot of problems in terms of companies not being willing to necessarily register. So you still had a lot of R&D and a lot of investment into Israel, but increasingly corporations were reluctant to necessarily register the company inside Israel. Now, this judicial reform has been, to some large degree, set aside, at least for and probably will not be implemented. So I don't think that you could say that there's been a reduction necessarily in investment because of the war. There is a general crisis in the tech sector that's happening in the United States as well, and Israel is highly exposed to that. So what you've seen is, if you look at it in terms of all the threats and all the challenges and, the war with Iran and all the rest of it, Israel's economy, he's right to say that Israel's economy is enormously resilient, but still it's suffering. This war is very costly. It's led already to a decrease in the standard of living because we have a young and growing population. And so even if the economy is merely flatlining, that means that on a per capita basis, we're losing ground. There's an acceptance that long-term defense spending is going to have to go up. It had reached a steady state of officially 4.5%, but it was always a little bit higher than the official statistics. We're now talking about a steady state of something like 7%. And of course, that comes at the expense of something else. Again, I mean, the other thing I should just mention about the speech is it came in the context of a report that was issued about another scandal that probably isn't getting enough coverage, having to do with the purchase of German submarines and the way he handled that. And part of the context for the speech was there was a lot of criticism of his behavior and the way he sort of made these decisions without any input from anybody else, and hid a lot of these decisions. And he was trying, I think, to create a kind of post hoc justification for the way he, for the decisions, that the decision processes that were being criticized. And of course, in this particular case, usually he's very, very self-confident. He's an excellent rhetorician in both Hebrew and English. But this time, he really kind of misspoke. And again, he had to walk it back last night.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts and your insights, Michael Ben-Gad. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time, but thank you so much for giving us your time here on France 24.